Schlocktober. It's about weirdo, obscure Halloween-type movies. We do it for a whole month. Enjoy it! So, has this thought ever occurred to you? You may have said to yourself, there are so many horror movies about one marquee killer who has a unique gimmick and or signature weapon for branding purposes, why don't they just do one where it's a whole team of murderers, each with their own signature-looking weapon? You know, like a slasher movie Super Friends. And you know, that's not a bad idea. In fact, it's such not a bad idea that someone indeed already made a movie out of it. And they called it Neon Maniacs. And yeah, that is pretty much the pitch. It's your basic Friday the 13th and or Halloween knockoff teenage slasher movie, but instead of just one specialized killer, it's a whole team of them boasting a remarkable amount of variety. You got an axe murderer, a knife guy, an evil surgeon, a biker, a samurai, a hangman, an ape-man, medieval crossbow guy, soldier, electricity guy, a Native American zombie with spear, dude with big knife hands we only see like twice, this Cyclops lizard dude. So yeah, quite a crew. Our story supposedly takes place in San Francisco, with the Neon Maniacs emerging every night from a bunker under what we're supposed to accept as the Golden Gate Bridge, their presence being for some reason foretold by a set of officially licensed tarot cards. From there, they proceed to a nearby park and slaughter a group of teenagers.
Think fast, pal. Guys want to play rough?
Inexplicably leaving only one girl named Natalie alive. That word inexplicable, by the way, is going to come up a lot, just so you know. To wit, the Neon Maniacs, who are in fact not neon and actually go about their business in a fairly well-organized, level-headed, non-maniacal fashion, inexplicably vanish from the scene. The police question, but they inexplicably don't hold or follow up with Natalie, despite finding her as the sole survivor of a fucking massacre.
There'll be hell to pay if a dozen kids turn up missing overnight.
We sure can't tell anyone her story.
What do you think, Lieutenant Devon?
Let's see what the sunrise brings.
The same police find fucking ectoplasm at the crime scene and just leave it there inexplicably for people to pick up later. Natalie's parents are on vacation and are inexplicably not contacted or summoned home about this by anybody.
Hi, darling. Hal and I are having a wonderful time. We left Paris last night, and you can now reach us at the Rome Carlton.
And Natalie herself inexplicably just tries to go back to school like nothing happened, even though everyone already knows about it and has questions.
I'm Donna, Raymond's sister. What the hell was that bullshit you had at the police? And where's my brother?
I'm sorry, Donna, but your brother is dead.
Liar! You're a liar! Go, goddammit! Let's go!
Yeah, Steven.
And she's plagued by nightmares where it rains blood. And the Neon Maniacs keep showing up at her house. Most of this inexplicability can probably be chalked up to budget. It's very clear that the production could only afford whatever absolutely needed to appear on screen when it comes to anything other than the monster makeup and the gore effects. So continuity, narrative cohesion, fuck that shit, man. That's for rich folks. Doesn't quite explain this, though.
This your bike, kid?
It has the overall air of the kind of semi-independent horror fanboy self-indulgent show-off equality that exploded all over the genre post-Evil Dead, most prominently through the ambitious slasher-killer all-star squad premise, but also via reliable tells in the form of blaring references to stuff like old movie posters, comic book superheroes, Star Wars, Alien, and the ultimate fan-turned-filmmaker giveaway of having the character who figures out what's going on and how to defeat the Neon Maniacs be, yes, a younger misfit kid who's obsessed with sci-fi memorabilia, monster makeup, shooting their own amateur horror movies, and, hold on, rewind that.
Paula, it's way past bedtime. Okay, Miles, just testing the makeup for tomorrow's shoot.
Holy shit, yeah, it's a chick, believe it or not. In this one, the fanboy wish fulfillment self-insert character is a girl. That's pretty cool, right? Anyway, her name is Paula, and not only does she believe Natalie for really no reason, but whatever, she finds the Neon Maniacs' base of operations and discovers what their secret weakness is. It's water. Just water. And if you're thinking that makes them seem significantly less threatening somehow, yes it does. Incidentally, yes, we really are expected to somehow accept that Paula is a kid when she is clearly the same age as the allegedly teenage main characters. Anyway, the group decides through no discernible logic that even though they know where the Neon Maniacs live, that there's a giant body of water right next to it, and alternately that they're coming after Natalie, whose house is equipped with a literal swimming pool's worth of their kryptonite, they should load up on squirt guns and take the monsters on when they attack the big school costume dance because... just because.
We've had enough!
Hey, I need your attention. Wait a minute.
Eventually, the Neon Maniacs are defeated and driven back from whence they came, seeming to vanish before the police can collect any evidence that they even existed. A final coda, however, reveals their true place of origin. Another dimension in the back of a random truck. Yeah, this is a weird one. So how'd this happen? Well, there's not actually a lot of information about that, though the production was reported on in depth by Fangoria at the time. What's out there boils down to the whole thing being a complete clusterfuck. Multiple producers fought over the original script by Mark Patrick Carducci, but the guys who won the funding had to restart the production more than once. Early on, all of the actors playing the monsters quit, meaning that the Maniacs' costumes and makeup appliances no longer fit their performers properly. Not an ideal situation. There are moments when the lack of recognizable logic or human behavior actually threatened to elevate everything to an almost abstract, dreamlike level, but ultimately it just sort of plays out as a mess, though one with a lot of ambition. Unfortunately, the only person who could provide a full accounting of what Neon Maniacs was meant to be was writer Mark Patrick Carducci, who tragically took his own life in 1997. Leilani Sorrell, who played Natalie, has continued to work steadily, mostly on television and in supporting roles, though she's likely still best remembered as Sharon Stone's lover Roxy from Basic Instinct.
You haven't done it yet, have you? So was that a crime or something?
No.
How can you stand it?
Donna Locke, who played Paula, is one of the great mystery personas in cult horror. Neon Maniacs was her only screen credit as an actress, and there's no record of what happened to her afterwards or where she came from in the first place.
Sounds scary. Who's the girl?
Oddly, the most successful veteran of the film is probably Andrew Divoff. He played the surgeon maniac in one of his earliest roles, and later became a horror star in his own right as the title character in the first two Wishmaster movies.
Spare me, child. Behold my true face.
Oh my god.
Yes. The shit just hit the fan, didn't it?
Should you see Neon Maniacs? It's definitely unusual, though it's kind of the sort of movie that is better as a tape playing on the background in the party than as something you sit down and actually watch. But sometimes we find the really unusual ones here on Schlocktober. I hope you enjoyed this first episode for this year. Next week, well, that's going to be a surprise. Mystics in Bali. Alright, I've been waiting for a spot to do this one. Might actually have waited too long as it turns out, since this movie isn't anywhere near as obscure or unknown occult artifact as it was back when I stumbled onto it, but what are you gonna do? Plus, I'm sure some of you out there haven't seen or heard of it yet, right? Alright, so background. Mystics in Bali is an Indonesian horror movie from 1981. Appreciating its existence requires a bit of historical and cultural background in that regard. See, things were not going great for Indonesia in this period. The country's politics have been dominated by the US-supported authoritarian New Order administration under military strongman General Suharto since 1968, and by the 1980s, the direct investments from Western powers that had been artificially propping up the economy under the Suharto regime had begun to drastically slow. In response, the regime forcibly encouraged domestic employment through elaborate limitations on foreign labor and products. What this meant for the film industry was that while Indonesian audiences were demanding the latest blockbusters from Hollywood and also China, Hong Kong, Japan, Australia, and other nearby territories, any studio that wanted to distribute such a product was required by law to produce at least one domestic film for every 5 foreign films they imported, and as you can imagine, this led to a brief boom in the production of low-budget movies packed with sex, violence, gore, and explicit rip-offs of popular worldwide movie trends, some of them later turning out to be just bizarre enough to later become trashy cult classics like Lady Terminator, Virgins from Hell, The Devil's Sword, and so forth, and Mystics in Bali is regarded as one of the holy grails of this particular cycle, mostly because the Indonesian government actually ended up banning this one, and it only accrued an audience later on unlicensed VHS tapes circulated internationally. So, what's it about? Well, short version, it's a witchcraft movie. Our main character is Kathy, an American, or in some translation Australian, student who's vacationing on the island province of Bali to do some studying and hook up with this local Hall & Oates looking dude named Mahendra. So, what's she studying?
I'm surprised that a pretty girl like you would be interested in learning black magic.
Well, I'm just curious. I'm thinking that maybe one day I can write a book about it and tell it to the world.
We've all met this chick, right? College dilettante immersing herself in the appropriation of other people's sacred cultures because, hey, why the hell not? And maybe she'll write a book about it someday. Yeah, you're not gonna like Kathy. Fortunately, the movie doesn't totally seem to want you to.
I want to find out all the secrets of this unusual branch of black magic, and the only possible way to do that would be to learn it myself. The same way I learned voodoo, the black magic of Africa. It's gonna be a fascinating book when it's finished.
Anyway, Mahendra agrees to take Kathy to see the local Liak, a creature of Indonesian folklore that's a cross between a vampire and a shape-shifting medicine woman. All things considered, they find her pretty easily.
Who's there? The master certainly knows that we are here now, Kathy. Let's go over.
And she agrees to train Kathy in Balinese black magic, provided they bring her a blood sacrifice the following night.
This is good blood. Now, I need you to take off your skirt.
What are you gonna do?
Don't you argue with me. She must take off her skirt.
Okay, the freaky cackling hag conducting business via prehensile tongue is creepy, but what's bothering the hell out of me is where did these two fucking idiots get bottles of blood to give her? Well, whatever, despite the fact that Kathy immediately breaks the one don't show anyone the magic tattoo rule, the Liak starts meeting her for nightly lessons in the dark arts like morphing into a pig. And other stuff. Now, there isn't a decent dub or proper subtitled version of this movie in circulation, and it has barely any plot coherency to speak of otherwise, so this all gets a little hard to follow, but Kathy is also having sessions with the Liak Queen, who at first seems to maybe be the same Liak as before, but younger because of the blood, but is eventually clarified to be a separate rival entity, for reasons that don't really affect the plot in any way, shape, or form. Anyway, the Queen teaches Kathy how to turn into a snake, and then takes her out to a fancy dinner.
We went to this strange place where I saw plenty of delicious-looking delicacies. and I ate a lot of the things that were on the table.
Because snakes, you see. At one point, all three women turn into floating fireballs for a fight wherein the older Liak and Kathy defeat the queen and claim the throne, whatever that does. Cool looking sequence, too bad they never tell us which fireball is which or what the fuck was even going on until the scene is over. Now, like, the whole idea of the naive, innocent girl being compelled to nightly visits with a witch is pretty classical ghost story premise, but in most versions, loved ones who know about it probably react different than Mahendra, as in they, react.
I will soon be a master of the Liak.
This is really hard to believe.
This guy is just kind of moping about it and occasionally expressing vague consternation. His big take-charge move is to go report on everything to his uncle, a local holy man. But okay, just why does anyone give a shit about this movie? Well, because of what the Liak's actual plan for Kathy turns out to be.
Your head for a short time, and then I will attain total power.
Bet you didn't see that shit coming. Okay, the floating lady head with organs still attached monster is another staple of Indonesian folklore, the Penanggalan. And according to mystics in Bali, this is what a Penanggalan does.
It's all right. The baby will be here soon.
She seems to be having a lot of trouble this time.
Well, that certainly took a turn, so obviously this can't go unanswered, so Mahendra, his uncle, and some locals opt to bust out the good magic to try and neutralize Kathy and destroy the Liak. And also, this lady shows up.
Why did you do it?
It's because I still love you, Hendra. Although you left me for another woman, Hendra.
Wait, Mahendra left a good local girl for the interloping foreigner whose cavalier disrespect for their sacred culture has transformed her into a literal baby-eating bloodsucker? Wow, that's a lot of subtext. Or rather, it would have been a lot of subtext if we weren't hearing about it for the first time after the fact. Anyway, a wizard we've never met before shows up to defeat the Liak in a magician's duel and save the day.
Oh, I see. It's you again.
Mystics in Bali is inept and weird and vacillates wildly between stiflingly dull, completely insane, and fitfully almost intriguing. You can feel the enthusiasm of the filmmakers working to realize their culture's local folklore and mythology on film, and the authentic locales lend it a sense of, well, authenticity that only makes the cheap jack special effects seem even weirder, especially considering they actually had to shoot most of this in Java, because some Balinese natives were genuinely concerned that restaging certain rituals and practices would anger actual evil spirits. Alright, 2 down, 3 to go. Next week, monsters. Lots of them. So the new Power Rangers movie looks kinda bad, huh? I mean, just kinda dour and angsty, and look, Power Rangers was never precisely my thing, but what I know of it suggests it's always been kind of the opposite of that, yes? I don't know, it feels kind of like Hayam Saban set out to launch his own Avengers and wound up with something like his own Fant 4 stick. But mostly this thing looks like it's trying to ride the YA sci-fi misfit dystopian thing. I mean, watch the trailer and try not to think of Jumper, I Am Number 4, Maze Runner, Mortal Instruments, Divergent, and did no one tell them that that whole cycle turned out to have hugely diminishing box office presence and that all the movies have been pretty much terrible? Hell, by the fourth one, everybody even stopped pretending that Hunger Games was any good. I guess the idea must be to appeal to a new generation of potential fans, but isn't the show still on TV and still really popular with what would be the current generation as basically the same thing it's always been before? But whatever. The main thing that's always nominally interested me about the Power Rangers franchise is the odd and often awkward attempts to reconfigure cultural artifacts as uniquely grounded in its Japanese origins as the Super Sentai Tokusatsu shows into something like an American superhero series. The end result frequently emerging as a bizarre clash of dueling pop culture idiosyncrasies that's also very much on display in this week's Schlocktober presentation, The Guyver. Okay, background. Bio Booster Armor Guyver is a long-running Japanese manga and anime franchise created by Yoshiki Takaya in 1985, which takes the henshin transforming mecha superhero concept popular in Japanese children's television and makes everything more gooey. And while it never achieved the popularity in the West of some other anime fixtures of that era, it did find popularity among Western monster movie and horror fans for its creatures and abundant gore. So in 1991, legendary cult horror producer Brian Yuzna and Steve Wang teamed up with director and Japanese practical special effects legend Screaming Mad George to produce a live-action feature retrofitting the Guyver's unique aesthetic and design sensibilities into the mold of an American superhero film.
Come on, show us what's right.
We open with the scientist Dr. Sagawa attempting to smuggle a mysterious device away from his employers at the sinister Kronos Corporation and into the hands of a dogged CIA agent played by Mark Hamill, because Batman the Animated Series was still a year away, so this is what Mark Hamill was doing. Unfortunately, no longer young Skywalker is too late, and Sagawa is confronted by said corporation's oddly small army of hired thugs, whom he attempts to fend off by transforming into a fish monster. Yeah, it's one of these. Unfortunately, the bad guys can all do that same trick because everyone at Kronos is actually an alien called a Zoanoid, so the head thug, played by Michael Berryman, transforms into the much more powerful hench monster Lisker and murders him. But when Liska presents the missing prize to Kronos' evil CEO, the Zoalord, it turns out they've been had.
What is this? Some sort of masochistic...
The Zoanoids are dispatched to find the device, reasoning, as does Mark Hamill, that it will fall into the hands of Sagawa's largely unaware daughter Miski. Fortunately for her, Miski is an Asian woman in a sci-fi movie, which means the mayonnaise-bland white karate student she's dating is almost certainly a superhero, and she'll be just fine. Sure enough, boyfriend Sean soon locates the device the Zoanoids were seeking himself, and after running afoul of the world's least threatening street gang, finds himself transformed into the Guyver.
Sick or something!
And yeah, this stuff is the reason to watch the movie. The Guyver suit and really all the monster stuff just looks ridiculously cool. For the last 15 years or so, Screaming Mad George has mainly been known as the guy who makes the stage masks for Slipknot, but in the 80s and 90s he was one of the go-to guys for makeup and monster suits that needed an extra edge of punk rock weirdness for not a lot of money, creating memorable creature effects for Big Trouble in Little China, Predator, Nightmare on Elm Street 3 and 4, Society, Freaked, Tales from the Hood, and a bunch more. And whatever else may be lacking in the Guyver, whenever the fighting starts, it's a hell of a showcase for what he can do. Speaking of which, the next big fight scene breaks out shortly thereafter when the Zoanoids manage to successfully abduct Mark Hamill and Miski, pausing briefly for the featured Zoanoid played by stunt cast Jimmy J.J. Walker to accidentally wander onto the set of a monster movie for a gratuitous Linnea Quigley cameo.
No. You're not afraid of her. She is afraid of you.
Which isn't as painful as when he raps a moment later.
I've been looking high, I've been looking low, for the guiding, jiving thing to show.
Yeah, but like I said, we're here to see monster wrestling scenes, and the Guyver blocks off most of the end of Act 2 for a fucking great one.
Welcome!
Which Sam loses when Liska rips the power source out of his head, killing him. Yeah, didn't expect that, did ya? Everyone disembarks back to Kronos so Zoalord can monologue some plot exposition.
In times past, they were known as werewolves, minotaurs, vampires. Can you imagine these lovely creatures in the White House?
Reanimators Jeffrey Combs can do a cameo.
Sir, Mr. Palkus, this is, this is genetics.
We'll probably see him again this year, and Mizki can steal the unit back. So Sean regenerates, we get another big monster battle.
Stay back!
The Zoanoids kill Mark Hamill by making him go all Gregor Samsa on everybody. And the Guyver faces off against Zoalord in his final giant monster form.
Holy shit!
Good stuff. Yeah, the Guyver is basically just Kamen Rider with a lot more monster gore and a lot less riding, but if you're in the right mood, it's breezy and a lot of fun. They did do a sequel to this, which we're all supposed to say is better because David Hayter was in it and it was supposedly closer to the manga, but that just ends up meaning that it no longer has a sense of humor and features significantly less interesting monster designs, so it's kind of a slog. The original was not a major success in the US, but did surprisingly well in parts of Europe, where it was retitled as Mutronics. In fact, the German Blu-ray release is the only way to get an uncut version, which I recommend. Alright, next week, more Halloween fun. Today's subject is our first Schlocktober feature from the great nation of Mexico. So first things first, to my many Latino viewers, lo siento de antemano, mi pronunciación española no es muy buena. Second thing, it's our sole black and white movie this year, so let's get some more direct contrast in the decor. Spiffy. Alright, let's get into La Nave de los Monstrous. La Nave de los Monstrous, or The Ship of Monsters, was one of the most popular science fiction films produced at the very tail end of what's known as the Golden Age of Mexican cinema, a period from roughly 1936 to 1959 where the nation's film industry was not simply thriving but effectively dominating the entirety of Latin American and Spanish-speaking movie culture. It's also completely and utterly loco. Let's be clear, Mexican B-horror movies of this era are often prized by American film geeks for their tendency to play fast and loose with the strictures of categorization. Just because a Mexican genre picture says it's one thing doesn't mean that robots, mummies, superheroes, vampires, or professional wrestlers aren't going to show up just because. Case in point, The Ship of Monsters is a science fiction, horror, monster, romance, comedy, musical, western, and that's just the beginning.
Ay, manito. Qué feo te hicieron. Parece que te hicieron con lacha.
Our premise is that the planet Venus has been imperiled with extinction following the death of the last living Venusian man. From the looks of the Venusian women in the film, I'm gonna assume the cause of death was happily and from exhaustion. Anyway, the Venusian High Regent dispatches a pair of astronauts named Gamma and Beta, played by Ana Bertolopé and Lorena Velasquez, on a mission to travel the galaxy collecting male specimens of various alien species to bring back home and, I guess, figure out who or what might be biologically compatible. I mean, I guess somebody had to do the legwork on that one. After all, this is information James T. Kirk is really going to need someday. In any case, the collection of alien males gathered up and frozen by Gamma, Beta, and their simply delightful-looking robot, Tor, are the monsters of the title, which should perhaps more accurately have read The Ship of Monsters Whom We Have Kidnapped for Sex. The lineup includes a Cyclops, a giant tarantula, a Saucer Man-style Martian, and a talking skeleton. And because this movie is just packed, they've all even got their own backstories.
Tawan, príncipe de Marte, no te perdonaré jamás. Yo, Hook, yo rey planeta fuego, yo libre, yo hombre nane.
Oh, Tyr, gran sacerdote del planeta rojo, he de destrozar tus entrañas a la luz de Utari y sus 7 lunas. Casa perdió la materia, pero seguimos vivos a pesar de nuestro aspecto. Y nuestro poder es terrible.
But the mission is complicated when a malfunctioning engine forces the spaceship to make an emergency landing on Earth in the small town of Chihuahua, Mexico, where the ladies head out to explore and stumble upon our hero for the piece, Lalo Gonzalez as Laureano, a bumbling singing cowboy and rancher prone to tall tales who's surprisingly willing to accept that Miss Mexico 1953, Miss Mexico 1960, and their pet robot have simply wandered away from a passing circus. Also, Mexican movies in 1960 much more forward about certain subjects than Hollywood movies of the same era.
¿Usted es soltera, casada o qué? No me vaya a decir que eso qué.
Soltera?
You see, that wouldn't have been asked about out loud in the Martin and Lewis version of this same movie. Anyway, the ladies at first want to abduct Laureano as part of their men's stable, but they start questioning the mission and getting jealous over him when he introduces the pair to a strange human concept called love.
Y para eso necesitan ir con un señor que les dé permiso.
Pues se puede hacer sin permiso, nomás que no está muy bien visto en estas regiones.
Speaking of which, Tor falls in love himself with Laureano's jukebox.
Ay, mamacita, qué lindos bulbos tienes.
Sure, why not? It also turns out that Beta has been keeping a secret of her own. She's a vampire.
¡No! ¡No! ¡No!
Beta. No lo hagas, Beta.
You guys, this is a really good movie. Okay, so Beta is actually an evil interloper from Uranus, the planet of shadows, and she takes this opportunity to free the monsters, seduces their nominal leader, and unleashes the others to conquer Mexico in her name.
¡Ay, mamacita! ¡No sean montoneros!
If they can stop fighting over her first.
Y me siento orgulloso de estar a tu lado.
Incidentally, Mystery Science Theater fans may recognize Lorena Velasquez as the vampire queen from Samson Against the Vampire Women. No beauty of the Mexican screen ever looked better in fangs. In any case, it's up to Laureano, his younger brother Ruperto, and Tor to defeat Beta, rescue Gamma, destroy the rampaging monsters, and save the world.
¡Cuidado, gamita! ¡Se cae mi compilotón!
Ultimately, Gamma elects to remain on Earth with Laureano, sending Tor in the jukebox blasting off to bring the human invention of love back to Venus, because how can you not love a movie that ends like this? La Nave de los Monstros was a big hit in Mexico, widely distributed throughout second-run theaters across the country well into the 70s, and still popular among Mexican monster movie aficionados to this day, with no less than Guillermo del Toro himself sharing his appreciation on social media this very year. So why doesn't it have a higher profile stateside? Well, one reason might be that it didn't feel Mexican enough. Foreign film appreciation in the United States has a bad habit of regarding the national cinemas of other territories through a prism of stuff we just can't get here, cultural fetishism, i.e. largely ignoring Japanese movies if they don't feature samurai, kaiju, or underage schoolgirls being menaced by octopi, and since Ship of Monsters doesn't prominently feature crime-fighting luchadors, Aztec-themed monsters, or other elements thought of as Mexican genre movie staples by many Western fans, it may indeed have been overlooked.
Ahorita vengo. En este planeta el hombre es el que da la cara.
But it's probably more a case of translation problems. Eulalio Gonzalez Ramirez, also known as Piporo, was a huge film, television, and recording star in Mexico at the time, and a lot of the film's screen space is given over to scenes built around his singing and his Groucho Marx-style rapid-fire verbal comedy, both of which are difficult to translate properly via English dubbing.
Yo le pido que me dé un cariño santo, que me quite de andar por el sendero, a lomos de un caballo, buscando pero no hallo a quien dar mi sentimiento.
Vete a la arboleda grande, al lora el sol sale, nomás al quer infestado. ¡Infestado de dinosaurios! Bueno, dinosaurio chico, cierta se da al pobre animal si hay poco pasto, pero eso sí, dinosaurio fino, sin hueso y con una pluma primorosa.
Decimos al señor cura que nos vamos a casar y nos da su bendición.
Ah, te les recomiendo una cosa, que no se van a portar mal porque les pica un animal. Y ya.
¿Y luego?
As a result, the film is criminally underseen in the US, and the only official release was part of a Lionsgate Mexican cinema collection so specifically targeted to Latino audiences that they didn't even bother to include English subtitles. But unofficial fan subs are out there and are absolutely worth tracking down, because Ship of Monsters is a total undiscovered blast that deserves a much, much bigger fan base.
Raza de vampiros, habitantes de las sombras, uranitas, por fin será nuestra la sangre de la tierra.
Okay, one more to go, folks. Next week is Halloween and our final installment for the year. What's it gonna be? Tune in and find out.